everyone, today's chess puzzle.
Right.
White's position is queen on f7,
Okay.
knight on e5, pawn on d4,
Got it.
pawn on f4, knight on c3, pawn on a2, pawn on b2, pawn on g2, and pawn on h2.
Okay.
Rook on f1 and king on g1.
All right.
Black's position is queen on c8, rook on e8, and rook on g8.
Okay.
Bishop on b7,
Mm-hmm.
pawn on a6, pawn on b6, knight on c6, king on d6, bishop on f6,
Right.
pawn on d5, and pawn on h4.
Okay, sounds good. Let's get this going.
So,
Yeah.
looking at this, one of the first things that kind of jumps out at me is the white queen on f7.
Right.
It's putting some pressure on f6
Yeah, definitely.
and indirectly on black's whole king side,
Mm.
but it is somewhat exposed out there.
It is, yeah.
White also has two knights that are pretty active.
Right.
So the one on c3 could potentially move to e4,
Yeah.
and that looks interesting because it would be eyeing the d6 king
For sure.
and the d5 pawn.
Absolutely.
The knight on e5 also has a lot of potential jumps, including to c4.
Mm-hmm. A lot of options there.
What's fascinating to me here is how black's pawn structure,
All right.
particularly the isolated d5 pawn, could become a real target.
Yeah, very true.
Also, the black king on d6 feels a little boxed in,
It does, doesn't it?
especially with the white queen's presence on that file.
Yeah, the queen's really controlling that file right now.
If we consider black's options,
Okay.
the queen on c8 controls a lot of space,
Mm-hmm.
but it's also relatively far from the king side where the immediate tension seems to be.
Yeah, that's a good point.
The black pawns on the h file and d file could advance,
Yeah, they could.
but that might just open up more lines for white.
Potentially, yeah.
It feels like white has at least a slight initiative here,
I think so.
due to the active placement of the queen and knights closer to the black king.
Yeah, definitely.
The question is, can white force a decisive breakthrough
Right.
before black can sort of consolidate and get organized?
Yeah, that's the key.
The e4 square for the knight on c3 seems like a really key point.
Yeah, that's a big one.
If it goes there, it immediately creates threat.
Definitely. Puts a lot of pressure on black.
And if the knight on c3 goes to e4,
Okay.
what do you think black's most likely response is?
I mean, the pawn on d5 seems like the most natural taker.
Right, it has to take, right?
Yeah, I think so.
So if black takes on e4 with the pawn,
Mm-hmm.
that opens up a new line for the knight on e5 to maybe jump to c4.
Right, exactly.
So if the d5 pawn moves,
yeah,
the knight on e5 could jump to c4,
right.
attacking the black king
Directly. Yeah, that's a big threat.
So it looks like white might be trying to create a forced sequence here.
Okay.
The answer is white's knight from c3 moves to e4.
Right.
Black's pawn on d5 captures the knight on e4.
Gotcha.
Then white's knight from e5 moves to c4, delivering checkmate.
Oh, wow. Nice.
There you go.
Okay.
The knight on c3 goes to e4, forcing the pawn on d5 to take it.
Right.
Then the knight on e5 jumps to c4, and that's checkmate of the black king on d6.
Yeah, very nice sequence.
Thank you for listening.